Good. There we go. We're all set.
Thank you.
Evan will introduce you, and we will be on our way. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. This is a Mussar Institute webinar. First, you should have a chat window open in your screen. It should probably be the bottom right. If you have a question for the rabbi during the presentation, please type it in there, and he will note it. And if not, I'll give him a nudge as well. You should have all your videos off. Video takes up a good deal of bandwidth, and it results in the staggered look of lip moving, but audio following a second or two later. Otherwise, this should be relatively easy. Again, use the chat window for your questions. Sheldon Lewis was born in Chicago, educated at the University of Chicago and the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, where he uses rabbinic ordination. He was a student of Professor Abraham Joshua Heschel and has been active in civil and human rights causes. He was emeritus of Congregation Kol Emeth in Palo Alto, which he served for 33 years. He was involved in interfaith work to promote pluralism, mutual respect, and common cause. He has also been equally committed to nurturing bonds among the streams of Jewish expression. Rabbi Lewis has an abiding interest in reconciliation efforts in the Middle East as a supporter of the Open House in Ramle and the Amal School near Bethlehem, and Rabbis for Human Rights. It's my pleasure to have Rabbi Sheldon Lewis with the webinar. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Evan, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really honored to be part of this distinguished series, and I would just add about myself that this subject touches me deeply. It's really been the passion of my life. The subject of striving for respectful, compassionate dialogue and coming conflict. And I did write a book called The Torah of Reconciliation, from which many of the sources we're going to look at today actually. Oh, great, thank you. They come from that book, and it's been an abiding source of concern for me, and I've lost some sleep over it too. So I'm very happy to be with you to share some of my thoughts, and I would love to engage with you, and I hope you'll feel free to address questions or comments, and don't even wait till the end. We will save some time at the end. So I might just add too, I have a new book that just came out in the last 2 weeks called Between Word and World, from the press, and it does actually include material on this very subject too. Thank you for choosing on this Sunday to be with me and to learn together. And let's begin. It's no surprise to anyone that we as a people, we've had a history of destructive arguments that have polarized our people over time. Historically speaking, the rabbinic reflections or memories of some catastrophes in Jewish history have often been tied to the internal failure of mankind to one another in the course of differences of opinion. The First Temple and the Second Temple, in the eyes of some of the rabbis, the destruction was prepared by the internal vulnerability caused by in we deal with one another. In our own period, as you know, I'm not going to say anything that you don't know. We've often engaged in bitter internal debates that truly wounded us and often torn us apart. Just most recently, there have been just differences over debate over the Kotel, the Western Wall in Jerusalem, and how the needs of a varied Jewish community can be met. It's not really entirely resolved. There have ongoing political differences over the state of Israel, criticism of Israeli government policies, and over the agreement with Iran. So many things, and it isn't that there's been disagreement, but the way the disagreement has been handled. In the process, the fabric of community has often been damaged or torn, friendships severed, loyalty questioned. And I must say, I kind of bear the scars of some of this myself in trying to lead our community in Palo Alto for most of my rabbinic career. Perhaps the greatest challenge was trying to hold the community together amidst passionate disagreement. So, with that, let's look at some texts. We are, after all, a people prone to argument. It's simply part of our DNA. And actually, I don't know if it'll be surprising to you, but when I speak about intra-Jewish unity, I don't speak about overcoming the absence of conflict. It is possible, I truly believe, that conflict can be harnessed as a really valuable asset. We have our sacred toolbox of the repository of the literary repository of our people for millennia. We find ideal and a pathway to a treasured kind of argument. Machloket l'shem Shamayim, one of the key terms, an argument for the sake of heaven. In fact, so much of who we are as a people, our daily practice as Jews, the halacha, is a product of this official style of argumentation. And so we're going to briefly explore this resource through a selection of texts. And we view these texts through the lens of Mussar, especially the midot of patience, humility, and empathy. Humility most of all. And Ellen Marinas has said that has written that this is the fundamental soul trait, which I completely subscribe to. Most know what it is to be involved in passionate argument in the course of our lives, maybe even our daily lives. My hope is these texts will shed some light on ancient wisdom that will be helpful to you, to us interpersonally. So let us begin. We turn to the first text on your page. Machloket l'shem Shamayim Sofal Hitkayim from Mishnah Avot, Pirkei Avot. Every argument that is for the sake of heaven's name, it is destined to endure. That is not for the sake of heaven's name, it is destined to endure. One example of an argument for the sake of heaven's name, the of Hillel and Shammai. Let's, Evan, if we can scroll down a bit to the next. Let's say we skipped a little bit there, at least on my screen. Let me read the part that wasn't there. An example of the argument for the sake of heaven, his name, the argument of Hillel and Shammai. What is an argument for the sake of heaven's name? The argument of Korach and all of his followers. Which on your screen is a little bit ahead of where we are. If we could go back a bit and listen. Wait a second here. Okay. I'm not sure it's not surprising at all that to be told that there are damaging arguments, and Torah's paradigm is Korach. Korach, to remember from the book of Numbers, he was the instigator of a revolt against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness, and it was a destructive argument because it was really over power. For self-aggrandizement, there was nothing redeeming in the argument, and it ended very badly. But what is surprising, and this is what I want to point out, that this is probably the first time in people's literature where this concept of budding, the possibilities of argument, Machloket l'shem Shamayim, every argument for the sake of heaven, is destined to endure. And what does that mean? That it's a good thing for an argument to persist, to endure. Now we know that this is actually taken quite literally for us who are immersed in studying Jewish texts. We know that Talmudic arguments, every page, virtually every Talmudic page, and most in those arguments, there is ultimately a nod given to one side or the other after argumentation. But even the minority review is carefully preserved and studied to this day with attention and intensity in which the prevailing opinion is that. So these arguments are carefully cultivated, really. They're not to be, like, we study them, study the minority. There's much intensity into the majority argument. There's something that's been captured on all sides of an argument that's worth preserving if it is an argument framed in a certain way. But now let us go to the second text. This is a Talmudic text from Gemara, from Ruvin, and let's see, it's we're a little too far. We can go back a little bit to get to the bottom, to the top of it. I'm just.
That's all that's available on the slide, so the slide probably got cut off a bit.
Well, each person can scroll up and down in the document too, in their own. There's a scroll bar.
Yes. Okay.
That might be it.
Okay. So I'm going to read the beginning. The part is the most essential part. Rabbi Abba said, in the name of Shmuel, for years the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai argued. One said, the halacha is like us. Said, the halacha is like us. Then a heavenly voice spoke. These are the words of the living God. And halacha is like the house of Hillel. Phrase, since the heavenly voice declared, since these and those are those of the living God, why was halacha established to follow the opinion of Hillel? The students of Hillel were kind and gracious. They took ideas as well as the ideas from the students of Shammai, not only for this reason, but went as far as to teach Shammai's opinions first. And on my screen, that last line is what appears at the top for me. I'm not sure. I'm sure most of you know Hillel and Shammai were perhaps the most well-known of sages of the Mishnah in the first century. They were actually with Jesus. They were a pair. They were interlocutors. And it was not only the schools that they established that persisted for some centuries, actually. So when we speak of Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, it was their school that existed. And they become, as you know from that first Mishnah, a paradigm of a special way of arguing, which approaches the ideal. Machloket Shamayim. Here, if we're building a vocabulary for respectful dialogue, we have here a second really major contribution, and that is that after they stated their views, there's heavenly voice, this Kol, which unfortunately we are not privy to in these days, but they were in the first century, which said, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim. in Hebrew, English, both these and these are the words of the living God. This, I think, is such a crucial line in the development of an ideal dialogue, because there can be truth, more than one truth. There can be truth on both sides, and there's something worth preserving on both sides, more than on one side. We text, actually, this is a basic text, which I've used again and again. I know many of my colleagues have too, because it not only teaches us value, but it gives us a peek to the methodology which somehow had mastered even in the century. Hill and Shammai or Hillel, especially, we speak of him. The halacha was according to him, according to this text that we have in front of us, because he was, in the original words, Nation Nochin V'alovin Hayu, because they were, I like to translate, they were easy or kind and even submissive in argument, even while holding strongly to their own points of view. That is the house of Hillel. And he would take time to voice the opinion of the other, which I'm imagining this when they were in conversation with one another. He'll make sure that he and his disciples understood the argument of the other by saying it out loud and giving the opportunity to be corrected by the other. And he would say, they would give voice to the argument of Shammai even before stating their own. Now, I don't think there could be more basic principles of dialogue than are stated here in this text and in the early part of the first century and recorded in the Mishnah. Say too that here it might be a good idea just to point out that the midah of savlanut, of patience, had to be central in the success of their dialogues. Shammai actually was known to be rather irritable sometimes having a short temper. Hillel was the model of patience. But even Shammai, they were enough that they were able to be patient enough with one another to hear each other out and to argue strongly. But Hillel was the expert in patience. And to me, that when we enter into a debate with another whose opinion is passionately held and opposite to our own, that with the other, learn to be patient, to be quiet and to listen, and all the surrounding virtues around patience. That this is a basic midah. And come easily when you feel passionately about your own view. More of that a little bit later. And now, actually, I've decided to give you the whole source, which I thought is fascinating. We're not going to have time to go through all of it, but I'd like to scroll down, see if we can. Yeah. On your screen, just about the middle, in the English, it was taught in a brisa. For 2 years, the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel argued. These never to have been created than to have been created, and better for man to have been created, not to have been created. They decided better for man never to have been created than to be created. Now he has been created, he should sift through his actions, and those who say he should examine his actions. So there may be a little bit of humor in all this, but you can see that in addition to very practical matters of halacha, of living justly, that were the subjects of many of the debates between Hillel and Shammai, philosophical debates. whether or not it would have been better if the human being had not been created than had the human being been created. And of course, they were debating the vagaries, the ups and downs of human life. And that actually is a segue to the verse, text number 3, and we can actually put up on our okay. This is actually a famous text from Bereshit Rabbah, a kind of an early medieval collection of rabbinic midrash on the Torah, collected in accordance with books of the Torah and the Parshiot of the Parshiot. And let's look at that. This is related to the last part of the Gemara that we just read. Rabbi Simon said, when it came for the Holy One, blessed God, to create the first human being, the divine service broke into groups. Some among them said he or she should be created. Some among them said she should not be created. This is written, kindness and truth met, righteousness and peace hissed from the book of Psalms. Kindness, let he be created because she will bestow kindnesses. Truth says, let he or she not be created because she is entirely made of lies. Righteousness says, let she be created, for she will do righteous acts. And it says, let she not be created, for she is entirely decent. What did the Holy One, blessed be he, do? God and bring him to the ground. Thus said, I'll cast truth to the ground. The angel of divine service said before the Holy One, Master of worlds, why do you despise your seal of truth? Let truth rise from the ground, as it is written, it will grow from the earth. Rabbi of Tzipori said, while the angels of divine service were arguing with one another and occupied with one another, the Holy One praised God, created the first human. God said, why are you debating? The human is already created. So whereas Hill and Shammai may have debated the fact of whether it was a wise thing for human beings to be created, here in the Midrash you have space and what the debate must have been like before the chapter of Genesis. Actually, obviously it's a very imaginative debate. It's actually based on a detail of a text which says in the sixth day of creation, Na'aseh Adam B'Tzelmeinu, let us create the human in our image, as though God were consulting with others. And so this debate by the rabbis, substantive debate, perhaps is somewhat based on that peculiarity of the text. So this debate, because say there are great things that humans are capable of, and as we know so well, and so with knowledge, the knowledge of the possibilities, both good and bad, that humans bear, this went on, and then perhaps about 1,000 years later, after this mesh was created, Menachem Mendel of Kotsk, in the next text, which I wonder if you can see on your screen. Menachem Kotsk, Menachem Mendel of Kotsk, who lived till the middle of the 19th century. And he was one of the great heroes of my teacher, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. And this is what he says, reflecting on this early midrash. He says, what's the advantage of casting aside truth while it remained, argued that she created. Yet with sight, truth prevail. The real one fights for his or her own truth, but when pushed truth aside, there is nothing about which to dispute. That there is no argument, and peace has no aim to make. As you remember, both truth and peace argue against the creation of the human being. The only dealt with in the mid, and that leads to the question of what about peace? And his answer, as you can see, is that really the key danger to is the truth, that people hold on passionately to their own vision of truth and leave no room for the other. And if that can be, if they overcome, then peace is possible too. And I'd like to pause for a moment here, just a little bit more about the midah of humility, which I think is integral to this Rebbe and of the Midrash and Midrash Rabbah. Humility is such a basic, fundamental trait, as mentioned, is so elusive and so difficult. But one of its main features is that it assumes that we make room for the other. Wherever we stand, however passionately we hold on to our own perspective, teaches us to raise at least a little voice within ourselves saying, then maybe we don't have the entire truth. Maybe there is some truth in the view of the other, and maybe we can even learn something from the other. Rabbi Lewis has spoken eloquently in his book, Everyday Holiness, about humility, and I want to share with you something that actually isn't on the sheet, but is a favorite of mine, speaks to this, about holding his own view and making room for the other. One of your literary teachers is C.S. Lewis, the great both science fiction writer and theologian and Christian thinker. And in his book, The Screwtape Letters, page 73, so maybe you want to look this up, he offers a definition of humility, of anvatanut, of humility. This is what he says. It means bring a person to a state of mind in which one find the best cathedral in the world and be the best and rejoice in the fact of being any more or less or otherwise glad at having done it than it would have been if it had been done by another. And humility is the state which brings the person to a state of mind in which one could do the best cathedral in the world and know it to be the best and rejoice in the fact without being any more or less or otherwise glad to have done it than it would have been if it had been done by another. To meditate on, because treasuring the contribution one has to make towards whether it's building a cathedral or making an argument for a certain position or a contribution that we might make in our lives. Having an appreciation for other who also endowed that special quality to make a special contribution too. And imagine the state of arriving at the midah of humility in which one can rejoice as much if another achieved something if one achieved it oneself. Up as a very high ideal and a difficult one, for sure. But I think that's at the heart of this issue of we get so worked up over how we feel and thinking about within Jewish life, about positions, about the agreement about different names of Judaism and expressions of being Jewish. At the same, if we were able to stand back and to know that someone else, our interlocutor at that moment, something really special to offer, and we do something. We know something, God willing, we have something to teach and some contribution to make, but we also have something that we can learn. Let's go on to the text. For me, much. This is actually an example. One might ask if Hillel especially was such an example, Hillel and Shammai, the way they argued with one another, and they sent Machloket l'shem Shamayim, an argument for the sake of heaven, really good argument. Did they ever change their minds? It's possible. One can argue and hold on to one's same position and still have respect for the other. But what about radical listening and even changing one's mind? Is that possible? And we find a number of examples, and I thought I just offer you about a time where there was a change in mind. So I read, these are matters concerning which Hillel went and according to the opinion of Beit Shammai, from overseas and said, my husband died, marry again. Without children, he must undergo levirate marriage. Says, we have heard so only in the case of a woman who came from the harvesting. Beit Shammai to them, it is in the case of a woman who came from the harvesting, or a woman who came from the olive picking, or a woman who came from overseas. Interesting, only because that is how it happened. Hillel went back and taught according to Beit Shammai. Now, this argument, if a report that a man, as seems the case here, a man had died, does the woman have, but there isn't any real certification, there isn't a to be buried, there's only a report, can she remarry? And if she's childless, in biblical terms, is the brother-in-law, if there's a brother-in-law, is he obligated to marry his former-in-law in order to raise children in the name of the deceased? And there's a debate in the certification so that there's marriage, that there can be remarriage. And here, as you can see, there was a difference of opinion. Difference of opinion between Hillel and Shammai, and in this case, Hillel seemed more strict about the circumstances in which the report of a woman would be believed. Apparently, the details here are not all that important for our purpose, but if there was a time of harvesting and is reported to have died during the harvest, Hillel perhaps felt that it was more likely the case that she actually was a witness and she believed. In other cases, perhaps not. The details are not that important. But what is important here is that he reconsidered after listening to the arguments of Shammai and changed his mind. Came to the conclusion, Shammai. So they both were in agreement. Think to myself about passionate arguments. How often is it that truly convinced by the other? and really emerges from the argument transformed. In other words, is able to listen that deeply, able not only to learn, but even to be convinced that the other has more truth than one side in that particular case. So we have classical examples of patience being able to really not only state clearly and passionately one's own side, but to listen to the other. And let us go to also a favorite text, and I see me as a board as the favorite text that we share. Rabbi Abraham Yitzchak Cook, the noted and very distinguished first Ashkenazic rabbi, priest of Israel, who passed away in the 30s, before the state was actually formed, but he left his great legacy of writings. And there is this text, this wonderful text, which actually is in the Siddur by every day. And it begins, this text, actually it's found in the Gemara in several places. Rabbi Eliezer said in the name of Rabbi Chanina, students of the sages or Torah scholars cause peace to increase in the world. As it is said, all children will be learned of God and will be the peace of your children. So this is the rabbinic text. And in a way, the surprising thing is, perhaps even before we look at Reb Cook, is that Talmidei Chachamim, the sages, known perhaps most of all for arguments. In fact, I might just note here that we, especially in the classical period, we know the sages often in pairs. Hillel and Shammai are, of course, a dramatic example. Akiva and Yishmael, Rava and Abaye, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Yasser. Again and again, we have them as they were really joined at the hip. Rabbi Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, another very famous pair, they were noted for their disagreements, that they had a history, really often a lifelong history of disagreement. And this alleges that they cause peace to increase in the world. And so there seems to be maybe an obvious question. Well, how could that be when they're the source of arguments? And it's that question which Rav Cook addresses. So let's look at that text. There are two err. The world will not be built except by means of one form in points of view and qualities. So, perhaps in some quarters still the ideal unity, should be people thinking alike. That's what peace really means. What goes on. Therefore, when they see students of Torah inquiring into wisdom and the knowledge of Torah, it means that they're searching the perspectives and approaches multiply. They must cause argument and the opposite of the peace. It is not so, for true peace cannot come into the world except by means of the view of a peace of many faces. In Hebrew, that's Ribui HaShalom, and which I've translated as many faces. There's perhaps some better ways to translate that. And a peace of many faces means that all sides and approaches are seen, and it's clear how there is a place for them all, each one according to its worth, its place, and content. And, on the contrary, all positions that appear superfluous or contradictory will be seen when the truth of wisdom is revealed in all her many-sidedness, for only by means of the coming together of all the parts and all of the details and all the views that seem different and all the divided branches, Truly, by their means, the light of truth and righteousness will appear. The laws of God, His reverence, and His love and the light of the Torah of truth. Therefore, Torah scholars increase peace, for just as they broaden, explicate, and give birth to new words of Torah, in locating new aspects out of different aspects in which there is multiplication and division of themes, in this they increase peace. So this is a text, an easy one, but Cook, and this is just one part of a larger lot of the subject, and she says that in a sense we are all builders. Torahs are bonim, they are builders. They're building a structure, and that structure has different parts. And part is absolutely essential, although it may not seem so at the beginning, and there may cause some sparks and passion in argument. But ultimately, they are all needed. They're all needed. He's talking here about Jewish law, really, and not about the great big wide world outside necessarily. And they're extrapolating somewhat. But I think it's fair that in many cases, each person, if their intention is good and for the sake of heaven, for finding a richer and a deeper truth, then each has something to offer. You would do well to, but also to listen eloquently and deeply, and to look for that spark that the other person can offer us. So this, I mentioned the midah of humility there. I think all of these midot really, I think, pervade all of these texts and stand behind them. Here, our time is going so quickly. Let's go quickly to the next text. We actually very quickly in this hour we've moved through about 2 millennia. We started with the mission in the first century, and now we're heading into the 21st century. I hope we're not traveling too fast for everyone. This next text from a scholar many of you know, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who I think is still writing and teaching us so eloquently. The dignity of difference. Actually, the dignity of difference is one of my favorite books, which I hope everyone would add to one's library. And he's speaking actually not about halacha, but he's speaking about interreligious difference. And so let's look at that text. And I wonder if we can look a bit to see the whole text. Oops, so we... So some of it is there and some of it is not, but I will read it. Truth on earth is not nor can be the whole truth. It is limited, not comprehensive, particular, not universal. When oppositions conflict, it is not necessarily because one is true and the other else. It often is. It represents a different perspective on reality, an alternative way of structuring order. Immeasurable than a Shakespeare sonnet, a Michelangelo painting, or a Shakespeare sonata. And here is truth. On earth there are truths. Therefore, culture has something to contribute. Each person knows something no one else does. As is said, who is wise? One who learns from all people. The wisest is not one who knows oneself wiser than others. One who knows all people have some share of the truth and is willing to learn from them, for none of us knows all the truth. Us knows some of it. it would be to almost make it liturgical, to read it and to meditate on it every day. And he, Sachs, who was the chief rabbi of until his retirement, was deeply involved in interreligious work, Anglican Church and other faiths, and learns this clearly as from rabbinic sources. Who is one who learns from all people that even we as Jews feel we an incredible treasury of literature and quest for truth over since we appeared on the stage of history, that we have something to offer for sure, something beautiful to offer, something rich to offer, but we're not the only ones. And it's worth of us to use the midah of empathy, if I can add that in at this point, to know to the other, to listen to the other, even from a very different and distant perspective from our own. It's something we can learn from it. And friends, there is one last text, and then hopefully we'll have a little time for dialogue. It's also a magnificent text, and also I've just given you a part of text written by Leon Wieseltier, argumentative Jew, which appeared in Jewish Review of Books. And he writes, learning to live with disagreement, moreover, is a way of learning to live with each other. And logically, the term Machloket refers to separation and division, but the culture of Machloket is not in itself separatist and divisive. This is because all the parties to any particular disagreement share certain metaphysical and historical assumptions about the foundation of their identity. But beyond general axioms, the really remarkable feature of the Jewish tradition of Machloket is that it's itself a basis for community. The contention, the contentious community, is not as paradoxical as it may seem. Parties to a disagreement are members of the disagreement. They belong to the group that wrestles together with the same perplexity, and they're together for the sake of the larger community to which all belong. A community that needs to know how Jews should behave and live. The core evidence of coexistence. The tradition is full of rival authorities and rival schools. It owes its excitement to those grand and even bitter altercations. But the ways play themselves out within the unified framework of the shared search. There is dissent without dissension, and yet things change. Until discord, if it's practiced with methodological integrity, is compatible with soul peace. Wieseltier is really worth reading in its totality. If you want to seek the whole article, it's not a book, but an article. It would be in the Jewish Review of Books. So, my friends, I've been talking at you, and I would love to enter into some blog and if there's you'd like to ask, I would love to respond to it. Let me see, there's
Anyone with questions can add those to the chat box on the lower portion of the screen. Rabbi will see through them and answer.
So you a chance to do that. Let me try to summarize a little bit. And a word about the midot that we've discussed today as well. But I think this is the surprise, really, in all of these texts. Machloket is a way of being, can be good, constructive, and fruitful, because so much of our lives is an ambiguity about it. We are not omniscient and all-powerful. We know everything, no matter how gifted we are. And we do our best if we collaborate, if we learn from one another. And as there has been, our tradition is a testimony to that there can be a community of it. That is desirable to nurture. And this is really the takeaway. It is better to live in a community with differences of opinion than with of one mind. Once more, it is better to live in a community with differences of opinion than one which someone is of mind. It's more interesting, but it's more productive. But if these midot, these personal midot, are operative, midot of patience with one another, humility before one another, empathy with one another are strong. And a student with you of Mussar literature, I'm sure many of you are more knowledgeable about the pathways of Mussar than I am. But I do know that these are not simple matters. In the midst of an argument, to be pathetic, to be patient, to be humble, these are high bars that are set, and the hard work, the personal work, one by one, each of us, is really instrumental. You can't have one can't wish for Machloket Shamayim to exist. It's a product of hard work. And I admire all of you who are devoting yourself to this literature. There is an irony, and that is that we live in our tradition this tremendously valuable asset that is in cultivating constructive, respectful, passionate arguments. But we often fall very, very short. So to overcome that gap, we can't give up on that. I wonder, any have any comments? I don't see any yet on my chat.
Well, I don't see any questions. I know everybody's still there, as I can see. So if anybody has any questions, please those in.
I'm reading.
So if there are no questions, then we can wrap up. And there is a question from somebody. I don't know if you can read that, Rabbi. A few questions now. See?
Okay, great. How do you help someone else to argue that way? Oh, wonderful. Yes, actually, clearly, Machloket l'shem Shamayim requires two tango. It can be an expert oneself and let the other even wants to be on the same and to enter, then Bill will fail. However, honestly, I don't think one can do the hard work for anyone else, but one can model patience and empathy and humility, and I think that can itself be can make another who hasn't arrived at that level stop and listen. In other words, if two people are arguing, and one person is still able to ask a question of the other, to inquire into this, why do you hold with such a view that you hold, and I can begin to understand where you come from, even though I'm in another place. I mean, if a person models that kind of approach, which is stressful because, if the other, is truly being kind and maybe attacking in an attacking mode and a demeaning mode, it's very difficult to maintain one's midot. But I think it can work. And I think also as a community, one thing that we've done in the Bay Area, and I'm sure in other areas too, is to try and put these ideas out in public. And we had a year of civil discourse here, which I think had some success, not total. But if those ideas are out there publicly, maybe and at least the small groups are willing to engage and to learn this skill set and work on them, it can be better, but not easy things. I hope I didn't give any indication that it would be easy. And then I see another question, given the inevitable state of conflict on some levels, should we also develop the strength to be more argumentative on level? Well, I think one thing Machloket l'shem Shamayim means, it doesn't mean that one should give up one's stance or raise the decibels of one's speech. But one can and one should, I think, hold on to one's perspective in the midst of the storm, and while one still tries to be to one another. It's the only thing I get that how to move people to listen to each other's truths. But if only one person is on board. Often the case that you absolutely prepared to listen as well to speak and to be empathetic, and the other person is immovable. Middle ground then, and who's going to win out? I don't think there's any guarantee. I wish I had a golden answer for that. I don't. I think it's worth and I think truly, I know our time is almost up, but I think it's worth the effort, even within the confines of our families, interpersonally, much less our community and the global scene, to work assiduously on these midot, to ready oneself at least, and maybe to teach one's children. I think if we are teachers, we have the ability to pass these skills on to others. But it is. And so disagreements, Machloket within a family, for example, don't get out of control. They can be managed. It's worth the effort, truly worth the effort. And is it possible that agreeing on objectives of the argument can get both on the same side and proceed from there? I think if one agrees that the objective of the argument is to gain more wisdom, for example, for the purpose of heaven, to come closer to truth, one can argue that maybe could partially help to shape the argument proceeds. So try. Thank you so much. You've been. I appreciate the questions, and I wish I could reach out and shake everybody's hand, but I hope you have a good day.
Thank you, Rabbi. I'd just like to thank you and thank Evan for being our tech person this morning, and thank Dahlia Brill, who put together such a wonderful of webinars. We still have a few more left, and we've had great presenters, and Rabbi Amy Eilberg, who helped connect us with our presenters this year and helped up the idea of this program. So I appreciate everybody who's involved, and I will be sending out a link with the recording and the text as a link as well. That'll be coming to you tomorrow. And we had quite a few people sign up who couldn't have live, but we'll watch the link. Over 165 people signed up. So it was a wonderful way to spend the morning or early afternoon. So thank you very much, Lewis. Thank you, Evan.
Thanks.
We'll see everybody next time.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.